Playwright in production, Auth, analytics, and global monitoring. The number one question that we always receive at webinars is, will you receive all the materials? Yes, you will do. Tomorrow I will do a write-up, and then most likely on Thursday you will receive a follow-up email including all the code snippets, all the resources, and it will most likely be in the Checkly documentation somewhere. And thank you everybody for participating already in chat. This will be a lot of live coding. It will be lots of code. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please drop them in chat. I'm just sitting here in Berlin in my office. I love these things to be as interactive as possible. So if you have anything, just shout out and I will come to it as soon as possible. But who are you talking to? I'm Stefan. I work at Checkly in the developer relations team. I'm a Google developer expert for web technologies. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I'm also a Playwright ambassador, which means that I get free swag. So this is what I'm doing. I'm doing a lot of community work, and also I work for Checkly, and we are huge Playwright fans, which allows me to publish a ton of Playwright videos on our Checkly YouTube channel. So if you haven't discovered the YouTube channel yet, we are at 55, almost 60 videos on Playwright, how to use it, how to get the most out of it, how to scale it. So if you haven't discovered our YouTube channel yet, I'm having a whole lot of fun over there. So check that one out. And also, we document a whole lot of stuff on in our docs at docs/learn/playwright. So you will find a lot of things how to scale and handle Playwright for synthetic monitoring, but also without using Checkly. So I think this is pretty nice, and I love working on these kind of things. If you're not aware what Checkly is and what we do at Checkly, so Checkly enables faster time to detect, communicate, and resolve availability and performance issues across the software development lifecycle. So this basically means that with Checkly, you can start actively monitoring all your web properties with or without Playwright. So you can do DNS monitoring, uptime monitoring, API monitoring. And yes, of course, you can also do Playwright monitoring too. So when I started doing Playwright, I think we were still all using the kind of old school Playwright approach. And when we consider the software development lifecycle, there are some stages in this lifecycle, right? So we have the development stage that writes the application, writes the features, develops the features. Then we have the testing stage where hopefully you have automated tests that verify that everything is working. Then we have the deployment, right? Everybody goes live, pushing new things into the cloud to our customers and users. And then we have the maintenance stage, which is for some people monitoring and firefighting. And when it comes to the traditional Playwright approach, well, when I started, Playwright was pretty much just in the testing stage, right? Some people, sometimes developers, sometimes QA engineers were there to write automated end-to-end testing scripts to verify that preview maybe works or staging environments maybe behave that how they should do it. But the Playwright journey pretty much ended there. And I think that we might want to change that, right? Because Playwright right now, you're here at the Playwright webinar, Playwright is having a real moment right now. When we look at the weekly downloads on NPM, this isn't a hockey stick yet, but Playwright is clearly entering or conquering the market with now 14 million downloads per week. And I think this is pretty huge. For me, I'm pretty much convinced that Playwright will take the whole end-to-end automation space. And we at Checkly are heavily convinced at giving you the best experience when you want to use Playwright in production. So when we look at this traditional old school Playwright approach, what we believe in is that Playwright should be pretty much everywhere in the software development lifecycle, right? So regardless if you're a developer or QA engineer, if you develop your feature, you are also in charge to kind of building up the end-to-end automation and making sure that everything is working correctly. Also, I see a lot of people already using Playwright MCP to automatically generate Playwright or even application code using AI. So then there, of course, there's the traditional testing verification stage. Then on the deployment, if you start running Playwright against production, you need to update your Playwright code base too, right, when you release. So it should be included in this stage too. And of course, then there's the maintenance stage where a lot of people, a lot of teams hand over the stuff that they just deployed to some SRE folks, to some DevOps folks, just saying, hey, now it's your job to make sure that this thing will work and that this thing is not throwing any errors. And when you adopt Playwright in production, well, you have the same Playwright code base used across all these cycles. And I think this is a very, very, very nice approach. This means when we look back a little bit, you or I was used to running Playwright in a single location, right? It could have been my local machine. It could have been CI/CD somewhere on this planet, right? And that is only part of the puzzle. If you start running Playwright in production, you can take your existing Playwright code base and deploy it and run it from anywhere in the world, right? Actively checking that your application is behaving, that your users are having a good time, regardless of whether they're in the United States, in Germany, in Australia. And when something is off, you don't need to wait for some logs or for some alerts coming after some users had a bad experience. You can actively reuse your Playwright code base to make sure that you are the first one to know when something is off, when something is off, or when there is some issue in production. So how do we see that at Checkly? So at Checkly, we believe in a monitoring as code and CLI first approach. So what you usually would do is you would run or write your Playwright tests against local hosts, right? If you want to, you can push the results to Checkly 2 using our reporter, but then you can use the Checkly CLI, and we will look at this in just a little bit, to take your existing Playwright code base and run it from anywhere in the cloud, really. You could take your Playwright code base and run it from the United States, from Germany, to make sure that maybe your pre-production, your staging, your preview URLs are working properly. And then you can take, again, the same code base to check and test your preview or your future monitoring using npx Checkly test. And then to transform this entire thing, your entire Playwright code base, plus the API and uptime monitoring, it is a single command to push it all to the cloud and be on the safe side and reuse your Playwright code base for production monitoring. How does that look like then? So here we have the Checkly dashboard, and there you see 3 Playwright check suites that are running from a repository from 3 different locations. And we will gather all the information. So where is this running from? What was the test performance? How long did certain projects take? And then you can dive into the Checkly interface to have a look at what the tests were doing. You can dive into the trace files. You can look at certain steps. So whenever you used the Playwright test report, you will feel right at home when you look at the Checkly dashboards, because we gather all the information for you. So when you then get an alert right at night telling you that a login is broken or something, you can just log in, look at the trace file, figure out what is going on, and everything will be like, or will feel like you're used to from your CI/CD, from your testing workflows. But when we now consider this, that you take this code base that you usually just run against pre-prod or preview URLs, or even just locally, there's the question of, all right, but how do you do it? How do you run Playwright in production? Are there certain things that you need to watch out for? Because you cannot just start hammering against your production side, right? And in this webinar today, in the next, 30, 35-ish minutes, we will talk about ads and tracking, right? So if you send the bots, even if your bots are the good bots, against your production side, you will probably mess with some statistics, with some analytics of your marketers, and they will notice when you start actively monitoring production. So we will have a look at how to resolve this. Then we will have a look at how you can make your Playwright test suite faster with shared login and account actions using Playwright storage state. Then we will check how we can make our tests location aware, right? In the old world, we were just dealing with 2 locations. We were dealing with the local environment and CI/CD. When we start running Playwright in production, we have local, we have CI/CD, we have CI/CD from the United States, we have CI/CD from Germany, and then we have production from also multiple locations. So the question is how we can deal with these kind of things if we adopt these patterns. And then, of course, when we're coming from a test first or test Playwright world, running Playwright test suites for more than 15 minutes is very common. I myself maintain a Playwright test suite that takes 15 minutes spread on 6 workers. Every advanced project will take some time to run all this automation. Should all this run in a monitoring context? That is a question that you need to ask yourself, but I will give you some recommendations on how you can find a balance to pick the right tests to run these kind of Playwright tests that are already sitting in your project as production monitors. And all this will kind of lead to your to a Playwright project that is ready to scale up, ready to be reused. And I'm just super excited about all these kind of Playwright goodies that I will just show you in a little bit. Disclaimer, before I enter my editor, I am a huge Playwright fixtures fanboy, and everything that I will show you will be circling around Playwright fixtures. And I would love to know from you in chat again if you're familiar with Playwright fixtures, because if there are a lot of people that are now say no, then I will make a little bit more explanation and slow down a little bit about the core use cases and what fixtures can be used for. All right, so we have Chris, we have one yes, 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 no, yes, no, 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 no. All right, that feels like 50, 50, 50. So if you're not using Playwright fixtures, I hope after this webinar you will do. All right, demo time. And now we're doing a whole lot of live coding. So if you see any typos, any issues, please let me know and we'll figure it out together. We are here in VS Code. So let me just close everything. Here we go. So this is a project that I use for demos and for webinars like this one. This is a project that is currently running on localhost 3000. So we have here a Next.js demo application that is a snowboard shop. It includes all the good stuff, right? So it includes an add to cart action. It includes product search, includes login, logout. All these kind of things are implemented here and everything works properly. So we have here now that I logged in. Let me get my password manager out of the way. It's greeting me here. And this is also deployed right now to Vercel. So we have here production side running just running. And we will also use that for our production monitoring. So you see also that I have a little bit of geolocation stuff going on here. So this is now also figuring out that I'm currently in rainy Berlin, Germany. And we will also set up our Playwright test suite to be able to test from different locations and to see that or to check that our geolocation setup is working. So let's have a look here. So this is a standard Playwright project. So what we have here is the normal test directory. We have here Playwright config. Here's our action plan. So I will work off that. And there's not much magic going on here. So we have a normal base URL, localhost 3000. We have one project, which is Chromium. And all that should work properly. So when we now kick off npx Playwright test, we have now 6 tests and 5 workers, and they're all running against local hosts. And the thing here is, so usually when you have your Playwright test suite, as already mentioned, you have 2 environments, right? You have local testing and you have CI/CD or remote testing. In our case, we need to change that all a little bit to make it a little bit more powerful and to make our Playwright test suite aware of how it should react to certain environments. So let's dive in. The first thing, now we're coming to the fixtures part, is when we look, for example, at one test case here, which is login spec.ts. So you see that it navigates to / that was localhost 3000 in this case. Then we're entering a password and then we check that the login worked by checking for a name. You will discover that this is not using expectant test coming from Playwright tests. This is using expectant test coming from a base file. And this base file is pretty much our main configuration for anything that Playwright can and will do in this scenario. So what we see here is that test is first of all renamed to base. And then what we call here is test or base extend, which allows us to add custom configuration and custom dependencies to our Playwright code base. This means here that we're defining a page fixture. And whenever now a test case goes in here and wants to record or wants to reuse page, we're using Playwright's internal dependency injection to kind of provide functionality on the get-go. And the cool thing about this is that we can also do things before and after our test cases. And this is why I'm 100% convinced that Playwright fixtures are the right thing or are the way to do, configure more advanced Playwright projects. So now to get started, what we can do is we can bring in, so let's check our action plan when we go to our Playwright config. We have to, first of all, make our Playwright code base environment aware. And because I already have this base set up here, I will now extend everything that we have here by using or by adding more Playwright fixtures. So as a first step, what I want to do is I want to bring an environment fixture. So this is an optional or value fixture. So what we can do here is we can define a default value. So in our case, it will be def. We will have 3 values. We will have def, CI, and prod. And we can mark it as an option true because we want to reset and reuse that in different scenarios here. But now we already see that TypeScript isn't very happy. So what we can now do is we can go in here and we can say that environment should be of type environment. So that looks good. So what we now can do is, for example, we can go in our test cases. And I think this is just pretty cool because you're not kind of importing, exporting files from all over the place. You can use the native Playwright functionality to now go in and it now knows that there is an environment available. In this case, it would be def, but we will change that in a little bit. So we now have here our first fixture definition, and we can go back to our Playwright config and start using that. So what we now can do is we can just go above here and we can say, hey, we want to define an environment. And this should be coming from, I defined some helper functions before, and then I will just log out the current environment. Here we go. Let me just fix the import because otherwise some bundling might not work. So what we now established is that when we now run Playwright, right? So we can go here, run npx Playwright tests. And what happens now is that we are clearly in the def environment, right? So let's have a look what this get environment function actually does. The thing is, when you start running your stuff in Checkly, you can check for a whole lot of environment variables. So let's have a look. So here we have the Playwright check suite environment variables that are available when you run your Playwright tests or when you run your Playwright stuff and in a monitoring scenario. So first of all, we're always setting Checkly to 1. That is pretty common. It's similar to process NFCI, right? But then there's also Checkly run source. And you see here, I don't expect you to read everything, but you see here that there are a whole lot of scenarios of when Checkly could run your Playwright code base. It could be after a deploy. It could be because someone pressed a button in the UI. It could be a test scenario. It could be a trigger. So all these variables will be set depending on what you do and how will be set on what triggered your Playwright test suite. And this little helper function here just checks, hey, if run source starts with tests, we're probably in a CI scenario. If it starts with trigger, schedule, group, CLI, deploy, deployment, or schedule, we are most likely running against prod. Otherwise, we will be running against def. So from that, we can now kind of adjust our Playwright code base to behave on or to react to this environment. So in this case, we were now running npx Playwright tests against our local def environment. But let me show you a magic trick. So I have the Checkly CLI installed already. And what I now can do is I can just call npx Checkly pw test. And this will now take whatever is in this project, it will run it in the Checkly cloud. So we see here, first of all, environment def. This is because the Playwright config was parsed. But when we now look into the logs that will come out in just a little bit, so we have here, all this stuff is now running in Checkly. This is not running on my local machine. This is executed with a single command as is with my existing Playwright code base. And we already see here that, well, this isn't going so well because right now this test suite is running against the base URL of localhost 3000. And this is not available in the Checkly environment. So let's bring that in, but let's make a first checkmark here. So extend the base setup with an environment. Check. When we now know the environment we are running in, we can adjust, we can follow the thought here, and we can also bring in our own base URLs, right? So you might discover the pattern that I'm following here. So when I now go with get base URL, we can give it the environment. And let's also log that out here. Base URL. And what is that one doing? So this is pretty much checking the environment and then is evaluating where this test suite should run against, right? So if it's dev, we want to run against localhost. If it's CI, I also set the production side here. So usually you would have a preview URL here, but I didn't want to make us wait for the preview flow all the time. And if it's not CI or not dev, we're going for production too. So with that, we now have here the base URL. This is now named the same way, right? So we can just drop localhost here, and we can then actually go, let's see, and run pw test again. And this now means that, again, this is just parsing the Playwright config. This now means when we run this Playwright test suite as is in the Checkly config, right now we're running it from EU Central 1. We will see that, okay, we have environment CI, here's the base URL, and we should now actually have a green test suite. And I think this is pretty cool. So let's see what happens. We passed, we're uploading all the trace files and artifacts. Cool. And whenever you've run your Playwright stuff in CI/CD, you probably know the dance. You have to download a zip file with the traces. You have to go to trace.playwright.dev. If you use the Checkly CLI to run your Playwright tests, you'll receive a handy URL that you can then access. So when we now go here to Checkly, let's see, and we go to the test sessions. Here we go. Here are my failed attempts because it was not properly configured. But here we have the Playwright code that we just executed in Checkly. So here we have the Playwright tests, and here are now all the tests that were just running in the Checkly cloud. It includes all the test steps, includes the trace file. So this is now what was executed in the Checkly cloud. So we see here that there was an added a product to cart. So this looks like a just good test case. And whenever you're tracing or you're hunting all the trace files, it's just so nice to have a single place to have all the Playwright artifacts. So I can highly recommend to find a single place to get an understanding what is going on. The cool thing about this now is that if we wanted to run this from a different location, right? Easy peasy. It's just another command line flag. So if we now run this with the location flag, we're running from US East 1 instead of from Germany. So especially in an e-commerce scenario or when you have some localization going, you can react to these kind of changes, and you can make sure that your website or your application is behaving properly from anywhere on this planet. So we have here again, we're running in CI, we have the same base URL. The tests aren't treating locations yet, but this looked like it was good to go. The thing now is with the pw test command, you can take your Playwright code base and you can run it as testing, as CI scenario in the Checkly cloud. But if you want to use Playwright for production monitoring, you need to initialize a new Checkly project. So what I have here already in this project is I have a Checkly config, and that might look familiar if you're used to seeing the Playwright config. So a Checkly project is pretty much a project that includes the Checkly CLI, and it has this config file, so Checkly config, that gives your project a name, a repository URL, some default locations, the frequencies, some Playwright config. So this is all just configuration for you to kind of tweak your Playwright cloud to your likings. And then we have here the check match property, and this was important. So Checkly, everything circles around the idea of constructs. So when we now go here into checks, we will find a whole lot of check.ts files. So let's go there. And here we, for example, have an alert channel. And here we have an uptime monitor. And here we have an API check. So whenever you want to define your monitoring or testing strategy, you can write that or define that in pure TypeScript and then use the CLI to either test your monitoring configuration or to deploy it to run on schedule and to be alerted when something is off. So here we have my critical suit check TS. So let me just bring that in. So what we have here now is that we bring in the frequency and our Playwright check construct. So this allows you to pull in your Playwright code base and run it on a schedule. Then we give it a name. Then we have here the Playwright config path. Then we have here the locations, the frequency, and an alert channel. So this is pretty much all it takes to take your Playwright code base and run it as synthetic monitoring. And now what we can do here is, because we have our Playwright check definition, remember with PW test, we could just go into our project and pull in Playwright tests to run them. But now that we have our definition here, we can go with npx checkly tests and the record flag that allows us to test our future monitoring setup. So if we now run this, you will see that we still have the log. I will remove that when we're done here. But we now did an uptime check against the base URL. We also had an API check going that validated the API responses of the product API that's included in the project. And here we now have our Playwright test suite running that is supposed to monitor and run the critical tests that we will add in just a little bit. And because I now added the -- record flag, we can again go to our test session here. And we should now have here a new test session that passed 1 minute ago. Here we have our uptime monitor, right? So we see here some information about HTTP and how this one went. Then we have our API check that checked for certain JSON properties in this API check. And here we have our critical user flows Playwright suite that is now almost ready to be pushed to production as production monitoring, right? And again, you already know the drill. Everything is available, so we can have another look. So this is what was just executed in the Checkly cloud, ready to get into monitoring. Cool. So now that we have our setup here, so we have an alert channel, we have an uptime monitor, we have an API check, and our Playwright check suite, it is literally just another command to turn that on and run it as production monitoring. And what we can do here is now we can run npx checkly deploy. And thanks to the preview flag, so let's do preview, we can have a look at what we now would actually deploy if we would run the deploy command, right? So in this case, we would create a new URL monitor, a new API check, and our new Playwright check suite that is included in this project. Also, the email alert channel was already there, but this already looks good to me. So whenever you're kind of worrying about, oh, now I'm touching the monitoring setup, rightfully so, because if you change the monitoring, there might be some triggered alerts if you trigger some alerts if you update your monitoring. See you, Felipe. Having a quick preview call beforehand is definitely a good thing to do. But I think this is now good to go, so we can call npx checkly deploy. Here we go. This now parses the project. Yes, I want to deploy everything here. And when we now go back to our Checkly account and we do a quick refresh here, you already see that we now have, so I have here some checks that were already there. These are my backups if I mess something up on the way. But you see that we have here already our base URL monitor that is uptime monitoring. This now runs every 5 minutes. We have here API monitoring. This runs every 10 minutes. And here we have our Playwright check suite that's already finished in Northern Virginia. And again, you see now the checks are running from Ireland, from the United States, from Sydney. And just to prove the point, let's have a look at the trace file another time. When we check the trace here, you will see that this is actually fetching geolocation. This is saying, I'm not sure if you see that, hello to Ireland. And if we now go to the United States and check the trace file there, it should say hello to the United States. So with that, now we have this Playwright code base, this entire Playwright code base running on a schedule from 3 different locations. And whenever something is off, Checkly will send me an email, Checkly will let me know. So that could also be an SMS or PagerDuty or whatever you prefer. And this allows me now to be very, very on the safe side and to know that in production is actually everything working properly. But now, as I already mentioned, right, now we started monitoring and running Playwright tests against production, which means that we will make a lot of requests, which also means that we will trigger some metrics and analytics scripts. So let's have a look at our example here. So this is now localhost 3000. And what is going on here is when we check the browser console, here we have a console log, which is like, watch out, I'm tracking you, which comes from a dummy tracker. So I didn't implement real tracking here with Google Tag Manager or something, but here's clearly a script that shouldn't be executed when I do production monitoring. Similarly, when we check production monitoring, we have here the same script, right? So this could now start messing with the analytics And the marketers most likely won't like that. So to work around this now, we can go back into our base file and we can start adding more configuration that is based on our environment. So when we now go here, we could say that we want to implement block domains, which initially will just be an empty array. And we again make it an option true. And then let's make TypeScript happy. So we want to have blocked domains is an array of strings. And from here on, because again, blocked domains will be accessible as an option, we can go into our Playwright config. Here we go. And you probably discovered the drill by now because I didn't want you to see me typing all day. We can go with blocked domains equals get block domains. And again, I'm passing in the environment. Here we go. Let's also log that out. Block domains. So when we here have a look now that whenever we on prod, we want to block these scripts. So we want to block analytics, tracking, and my little dummy tracker. And this now means that, well, first of all, I have now here some more configuration available, and I can go into our use block, and I can just add it here. Because we defined this as a fixture value, we can pass it here in this use block. We could also add it in this use block, but we are not actually blocking anything yet here at now. But the cool thing about fixtures is when we go back into our base setup, guess what? We can now also go in here and we can start accessing all these domains. So this now means when I go here and I will paste a little snippet that I have here, we will check if block domains isn't an empty array, right? So, and if there are some domains that should be blocked from being executed, we just hook into Playwright and we will task it to, for every request, check if the request URL, so this could really be everything, right? Style sheets, scripts, images. If includes this domain that we want to block, we will log to the console, right? Saying, hey, we're blocking this. And then we would call route board. Otherwise, we will just let this request continue so that we are not infecting or changing custom behavior here. So, and with that, when we now, for example, go back here and we run npx playwright tests, we shouldn't see any blockage happening because we are not in the production environment, right? Remember, we are here if get block domains is production. So that should just work fine. So here we again have block domains is an empty array. But if that now comes back in a little bit, we could, I'm YOLO deploying a little bit here, so don't do that at home. So if we now just deploy that, we can push that to production. And when we now have a look at the monitoring that is going on, so let's navigate here. We go back to the Checkly overview. We have now here our critical user flows. Let's see, 3 minutes ago. That should come back in a little bit. But what we expect now is that based on the environment that we are in, we will start interfering with the Playwright test suite. And I think this is especially important when you're navigating against or when you're monitoring production, because yeah, it's so many things that you could mess up. So let's see if this comes back now. So when we go, let's see, we have here now, let's look at Ireland from 1 minute ago. Let's look at the trace file. But we already see it here in the logs, right? So we started now blocking all these analytics strips to not kind of mess with all the metrics. Which now means when we go back here and look at the waterfall, we have here dummy tracker was blocked. And also we should now have here some log messages, which means, yeah, we blocked this file and it actually failed to load. So and I think this is actually pretty cool, right? Because now we have 3 environments. We have local, we have CI, and we have prod. But when we look at this entire scenario here, we are still kind of running all the tests that are included in this test suite, which you usually don't want to do. Because when you think of it, in a pre-deploy or in a preview scenario, it's totally fine if your player tests run 15, 20, 35 minutes, right? But in a monitoring scenario, what you really want to do is you want to have a snappy alert when something is off. So my test cases here right now take 14 seconds. This is great. But a real world scenario is easily much, much, much longer. So what we want to do in our Playwright tests that run as monitors is we want to keep the time that these run as short as possible, because this is the time that it takes to send you an alert. So let's make our Playwright test suite a little bit quicker. So the first thing that I want to do is, for the people that don't know about storage state, I would like to bring in storage state because it allows us, or allows me, to speed up any Playwright code base, right? Whenever you have something that logs in, that needs something or creates something, most of the time you can use storage state in Playwright to perform the action once and then reuse whatever cookies were set in the application so that all the other tests can reuse this information and kind of don't have to repeat all these actions all the time. So let's go into our login spec.ts file. So this is a very common login operation, right? And if you would now work for a software as a service company, most likely every test would need to log in one form or another, right? So what we can do here is, first of all, we can rename this file to setup.ts. This is just a convention that I like a lot because it differentiates the actual spec files and the files or the Playwright tests that are used for setup purposes. And what we now can do is we can also, this is just a convention that I like, we can rename test setup. Here we go. Let's rename these setup, which means now it's pretty much the same. It's just renamed. But when I now enter this file, I know, okay, we're dealing here with a setup file. And what we now can do is, because we now have a login.setup.ts, we can go back into our Playwright config. No, I don't want to do that. AI, thank you. We can go back into our Playwright config, and the projects in Playwright are most of the time used, or at least in the example projects, for browser configuration. But I do think that they can so much more. So what we can do here now is we can go in and we can define another project, which we call setup, right? And this is not matching against spec.ts files like the default stuff, but matching against setup.ts files. And what we now can do is, let me just move these around. Let's move this one up. We can say that whenever this project here runs, we want to have a project dependency and that we want to run the setup step first, right? So when we now perform these tests, we want that the logged in or the login tests run first. But there's no shared state yet. So when we now go back into our login setup, we can after the login, we can start using storage state. And storage state is pretty much just all the stuff that happened on the page and was set in the browser written to a JSON file, right? So what we do here is we log in, we perform all the dance, and then after we're done, we are writing the context of the current page to this auth user JSON file, which then means when we go back here, we can instruct our Chromium project to also use this file, storage state, and it's auth user JSON, to reuse this file and kind of get a head start because everything will be logged in already. So let's see if this succeeds, and let's have a look at the auth JSON that was written already before, but I trust that it works. So when we have here our auth JSON file, this is pretty much just like cookies, all the good stuff. And you see here that this now set a cookie after my login action. And all these Playwright tests now start with a logged in session. This now means that when I run this in Checkly just for a little bit, that we will see this little greeting for all the test cases because we are already logged in. In our case, though, we are still now running all the Playwright tests when we would now push to Checkly, right? And the thing is that not every test in your Playwright code base is proper monitoring material. I could think of a login, right? Create account, maybe add to cart, but not everything needs to run as production monitors. And what I recommend you to do in these kind of cases is really kind of, think about what is going on and what you want to be alerted about when something is off. And for this case, we can set up another project. So what we see here now is that we have a critical project. So I like to call my monitoring stuff critical. So we have a critical project that also has a setup dependency, right? So we want to be logged in automatically. Then we reuse the user JSON, and this project here is grabbing for tests that have the critical tag. So when we look around, so we have here the search and we have here the critical tag. So this is a test case that will make it into production monitoring when I run this. So there's one last thing that we need to do now. When we go into our monitoring configuration, into our critical suite check.ts, we can specify the projects that we want to run, right? So in this case, I want this Playwright check here that is labeled or named critical user flows to only run the critical Playwright project, which then maps to this critical project and to these tests that have the critical tag. And that is pretty much it to run this. So when we now go back to the terminal and we run npx checkly tests and we record it, what we expect to see is that this is now running in checkly, right? We are validating if our monitoring would work in this kind of scenario. So let's see, we have here our uptime monitor, we have our API monitor, here we have our Playwright check. And if we now go to our test session again, here we go, less than a minute ago, that looks good. And I expect now that we have a single test case that was marked as critical. We have here the login works because we have this project dependency from critical to setup. And when we now look into the trace file, I expect that the initial navigation, here we go, is already logged in. And I think this is just pretty sweet. So you can kind of maybe have a monitor with 5 things for the login. Maybe you want to have 5 for the search, maybe 5 tests for the add to cart. But this approach kind of gives you a Playwright native approach using Playwright projects to divide and conquer your entire Playwright test suite. Whereas in a testing scenario, it really doesn't matter if you run 15 minutes, 20 minutes, all these kind of things. Eric, for Playwright testing of an Electron app, I have no idea. Sorry about that. So in this kind of scenario, James asks if there are any concerns with production passwords being stolen in storage state. I mean, I'm not too concerned about it. I would have to think about that a little bit more, but this flow is very common in Playwright test suites too. So you have this file that you will have in the checklist CI. We also do secret scrubbing and we remove sensitive information to not store on our end. And yeah, but Marcos is right. So storage state, there's usually no password information, but you could still worry about the credentials or the session token that might be leaked, but we do secret scrubbing and we try to be as clean as possible on that end. All right. Good questions though. Love it. So with this kind of scenario, let me just deploy that very quickly. Let me go here. And I think we are ready to deploy. So what we now have is our slimmed down critical test suite that will now run as production monitors. And I think this is just very, very sweet. But there's one last thing that I would like to cover here, which I built that yesterday. And I'm so excited about this because it's honestly pretty cool. So when we now check again our production side, we have here still our geolocation, right? This is something that is terrible to test if you don't have the setup for it. How you could now spin up your VPN and kind of pretend you're in the United States, but with Checkly, you will have this information at your fingertips. Because when we check our Playwright or our Playwright check suite environments, you will also always have a Playwright region. So this now means that we can go back to our base file. Here we go. And we can bring in another fixture value, right? We could now say location, country, which by default will be null. So let me just bring that here to TypeScript 2. So location, country, and this will be null or string. Here we go. And you might have guessed it what I'm doing now. We're going to go in and we're going to define our location country, and get location country. Here we go. Let's log that out too, just in case something is off. So in location country is also just checking for the Czechly region, right? So whenever this code will be running in EU Central, we'll be in Germany. If it's EU West, we'll be in Ireland. We will be in, starts with US, and so on. And again, because we have it as a fixture value, we can go in here and we can say location country. We pass it into our Playwright stuff. And what we can now do is we can go into another test case that I have already sitting here. So it's geolocation. And that was quite a little bit to write. What we're doing is here, we're pulling in the location country that is evaluated by the Playwright config, right? Then we're going here to navigate to root. We get the container, which we have here. So this has a test ID called geolocation. And then we just check, hey, what is the location country? I have a mapping going here. So if it's DE, I expect Germany or Deutschland to be there. If it's US, I expect this. So, and if the location country is not available, then I know that I'm in the local scenario and I'm expecting geolocation unavailable. But with this, what we now can do is we can run our test suite, right, from different locations, and we can check if our geo-tracking is working properly. So I'm now running this. We're also recording it. So let's see where this pops out. When we go back to the Czechly overview, we have here, not heartbeats. We have here the test session. There should one be running less than a minute ago. We have critical user flows. My location check test has also the critical flag, right? So let's have a look at the test that was actually running. So we already see that we are fetching geolocation. We are in Germany, and we have here our assertion that is checking for hello to Deutschland was received. I think this is just very cool. If we now would like to check our Playwright tests from another location, right, we could add the append the location flag too. So, but I think this is good to go. Let's roll. And what happens now is that we deploy a final time for Playwright production monitoring. And we now have 3 locations with our Playwright tests, with our critical Playwright tests running that will also check for proper geo-tracking. So when we now go to home, we should have here our critical user flows, all these finished. So let's see if Sydney worked. So when we look at the results, we have here geolocation. Let's see what we got. We have fetching geolocation Australia, and here we have the test for it. I don't know about you, but I think this is pretty sweet. All right. So what we now did is that we took our Playwright test suite with some example tests with some real world scenarios and moved it to Playwright monitoring that is running in Czechly. So, and we're at 48 minutes. So I'm ready to drive that home. We made it, people. I'm super excited. So what we now did is we implemented environment-based request blocking so that we will not mess with our production side, right? When we bring the good bots and let them test production, we have to take care of that. We implemented shared logins and accounts so that our Playwright monitoring will be faster and sweeter and quicker so that we can receive alerts as quickly as possible. And I cannot stress that enough, that timely alerts are very, very important. We made our tests location aware so that we can check if geotagging and geolocation evaluation from the application works. It works for Ireland, United States, and Australia. And I showed you how you can pick and choose the tests that you are interested in so that you don't run monitoring suites that take 10, 15 minutes, but rather monitoring suites that take a minute, max 30 seconds, so that you can get timely alerts. So this is how we at Czechly see running Playwright in production, right? Run your Playwright test suite from wherever, honestly, and be the first one to know when something is off. And I think this is just a very sweet deal. Get alerted as soon as possible. I tried to bring that or tell you that a couple of times. So your Playwright test suite that you probably have already easily runs 10 minutes. Divide and conquer. Build up your Playwright check suites with 3 tests there, 1 test there, 2 tests there, to be on the first one to know when something is off and broken in production. If you wonder, because a couple of people asked me in the past how to do MFA or multi-factor auth. If you have implement TOTP, so with the token and the QR code and stuff, this is easily testable in Playwright. So if you want to, I will share that link tomorrow or on Thursday too. So you can do these kind of flows using Playwright too. If you have something SMS-based or mail-based, there are some providers that you could use to check your logins and create accounts. And then, yeah, I'm like an old front-end developer. I do front-end for now almost 15 years. And it kind of puzzles me that the entire industry is talking about uptime so much, right? APIs are important, but everybody stresses about 99.99% uptime for APIs. And I'm really puzzled that we are not all kind of checking or sharing how much uptime our UIs have, right? If LinkedIn is down, if any really huge site is down, I check the status page and it tells me about APIs. I would love the world to kind of adopt Playwright in production, right? I would like to go to LinkedIn if they're down, whenever they're down, and see a dashboard that tells me, yeah, but login should be working because we tested it from these locations. And if you adopt Playwright in production, you can do that easily by reusing your existing Playwright code base. And there's one last point that I want to make is, hey, I see there are already a lot of questions. I will come to them in just a little bit. But if you now reuse the same Playwright code in development, in testing, in deployment, and in maintenance, this means that you can unify your processes, right? Very often QA, development, and SREs or DevOps folks are using different tools. If you adopt Playwright in production, it will be shared ownership, right? You can have some developers, some QA folks that write some Playwright tests. Everything will be released together using Checkly Deploy. And then the SREs or the DevOps folks or whoever is in charge for alerts and keeping the lights on, everybody can speak the same language. And I think this is just a beautiful approach, and it makes user-first testing really a team effort. If you want to learn more about Playwright checks, you can go to checklyhq.com/docs/Playwright checks. Yeah, huge documentation. I showed you how basically you can do it. If you have any questions to me, you can always drop me an email or join our Checkly community Slack, which is available at checklyhq.com/Slack. And we are at 52 minutes, pretty good. And I will now answer some questions. If you have any more questions, drop them now because we will go over stuff. So Marcus asked, will or maybe is there a Checkly MCP server? That is an excellent question because I will include a link to another webinar that I recently did. The thing is, Checkly is based on these files. It's based on Playwright checks. It's based on constructs that can pretty much control your entire monitoring setup. And it's all text. And if you use, for example, like Claude Code, you can give it enough context. I'm not doing that live right now because I don't know if that will work on the fly, but you will see it in a video. You can control your entire monitoring setup using an agent, using an LLM by feeding it the right context, because Claude or whatever you're using is more than capable to calling npx checkly test, npx checkly deploy, and writing these files. So at least as of now, we think that for configuring, deploying, and updating your monitoring, there's no MCP server required because Checkly and monitoring as code is by definition AI ready, and it works pretty well. All right, Eric asks, can you use storage state with UMS? I read you got to go through the user flow if your auth is done by UMS. I don't know what UMS is. Marcus, again, how do you handle breaking changes in the UI? You see this at your testing stage, but you can't change the code because it would break your production monitoring. I'm not sure if I got that correctly, but the idea here is that you keep your application code with your monitoring setup 100% in sync, right? So you can run your tests in stage, and your monitoring or so your test code, so your Playwright code, similar to when you do staging deploys, is always in sync. And when you then update or deploy to production, you call npx checkly deploy to update your monitoring in the same go. So usually what you want to do is you want to push to prod and then update in a, I don't know, CI flow. So push to prod and then update your monitoring in the same go to avoid accidentally triggered alerts. Eric answers unified management system. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question because I don't know what a unified management system is. Is that like users from something like Okta? Is it something like that? Where you have user controls for the entire company? Going once, going twice. All right, we are at 6:57 my time. So unless Eric answers or there will be more questions, I will call it off in just a little bit. Okay, so a unified management system is a single platform to approach, oversee, and control diverse IT resources. So I assume it's something like Okta or something, where a company can control all the. Looks like you're on the phone, Eric, aren't you? Where you can control all the users. Here's the thing, right? If you go for production, testing certain third parties can always be a little bit tricky. It's very hard to give a clear yes here. It kind of depends on what you're dealing with. Storage state at the end of the day is just persisting the actual or the current browser state, right? So if you make it to somehow that Okta or whatever is using is not detecting that you're maybe a bot or that you're using Playwright, and there are ways to do that. As long as you succeed there, storage state will just take the session and that should work. Eric says, thank you. And with that, we are pretty much on time at 7 o'clock p.m. here in Germany. Thank you everybody for joining. I had a whole lot of fun. I will see you on the internets and yeah, take care. And I will see you very, very soon.